So today, I'm just curious, does anyone here know anyone with a really long nose? Yeah, not quite. Most people generally just have a regular sized nose, but some people have really long nose. Anyways, Muhammad is a Turkish guy, and he has the longest nose recorded in the world. It's 3.46 inches long, and that was when it was measured on the 18th of March in 2010. And I don't know about you, but that's a really long nose. I mean, it's 3.5 inches. It's pretty lengthy. You kind of think of Pinocchio. And today we're going to look at the long nose of God. And we have been exploring God's character in Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7. We've looked at the compassion of God, how he is moved to action by his emotions of care for his children. We've looked at how he is a graceful God, how he values and gives attention and gives good gifts to his children, and even though most would not. Now we're going to look at the next attribute of God, his long nose. So let's read Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7. And it says this, Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7. 33, that's not right. Exodus 34, 6 and 7 say this. And Yahweh passed over before him, and he proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding with loyal love and faithfulness, keeping loyal love to the thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. And he does not leave utterly unpunished, punishing the guilt of the fathers on the sons and on the sons of their sons, on the third and fourth generations. Now you may be wondering, where is God's nose mentioned here? And I would say that's a good question. I did tell you it is here, and in fact it is. But it's not in English. To see this, we must look at the Hebrew word of the text. The Hebrew language is rich and complex, as we have seen through the other words we have explored here. And the word here is erek apayim. It means literally long of two noses or nostrils. Erek is long, and apayim is two noses or nostrils. And it's usually translated slow to anger, or in older English, long suffering. This fun turn of phrase here is a new concept in Hebrew. If you remember, just like compassion was related to womb and how a mother feels for her child, this one here, it feels for a child. In Hebrew, you were to say someone's angry, you would say their nose burns hot. And this is related to the feeling of heat in the face and kind of the flaring of nostrils that you see when someone is very angry. So when you say someone is long of nose, or long of two noses, or long of nostrils, it takes a long time for their nose to get hot. So that's this idea here. And you would say someone with a short nose meant they were quick to become angry, quick to have a hot nose. So this is just a fun little Hebrew phrase, but it has a really important meaning. The long suffering of God, his slow to anger, his patience. So this declaration of God is unique. It's in the middle of the 5 attributes of God that's listed here in verse 6. And this attribute of slow to anger is a little bit different than the rest. It's more of a secondary rather than a primary attribute. It describes a pattern of how God acts, and more specifically of how he reacts to humans and how they react to him. And this attribute of God's anger is described as slow. Sometimes we see God's wrath and what it causes him to do, and it can terrify us. This can scare us, and it gives us a distorted view of who he is. Lots of people have problems with the anger of God. And this doesn't need to be the case. It's quite a very big theme throughout the Bible, God's anger, his wrath. From the Old Testament to the New, it is one continuous story, and it's very important that we have a good understanding of what his anger means. What does he get angry about? How does his anger cause him to act? Who does he get angry at? These are all good questions and things we need to know. It's important because he's described it of himself. And he said that he is slow to anger. So let's explore this attribute of God. The first place I would like to look at God of an action is in Genesis chapter 6. And this section of Genesis is the flood story. So join me there in Genesis chapter 6. And a lot of people may think the story of the flood comes from God's anger. But we'll see what the text tells us it comes from. So Exodus chapter 6, and we're going to start in verse 5. Or not Exodus, Genesis chapter 6, starting in verse 5. And it says this. We're going to read through 13. And Yahweh saw that the evil of humankind was great upon the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was always only evil. And Yahweh regretted that he had made humankind on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And Yahweh said, I will destroy humankind whom I have created upon the face of the earth, from humankind to animals to creeping things, and to the birds of heaven, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. And these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, without defect in his generations. Noah walked with God. And Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence, and because of them, now look, I am going to destroy the earth, them along with it. Here we see in the text God's cause for destroying the world, and it is not anger. It is, in fact, it says, his heart is grieved. He regrets making mankind. They are destructive and violent, and they are destroying the earth. And God says, as you're destroying the earth, you're going to be destroyed with it. You'll get what you want. And he does this full of sorrow. It's not anger here. And so this starts to raise a question of, when does God get angry? And where does his judgment come from, if not from anger? And the people here in the story bring judgment on themselves. The only one righteous is Noah. And we will see this also in 2 Peter, when he's talking about why God has not brought judgment on the world the second time yet. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 13, we're going to read that real quick, just to have a good relation to this same idea in the New Testament. So again, 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 13 say this. Now, dear friends, do not let this one thing escape your notice, that one day with the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day. The Lord is not delaying the promise, as some consider slowness, but is being patient toward you, because he does not want any to perish, but all to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will disappear with a rushing noise, and the celestial bodies will be destroyed by being burned up, and the earth and the deeds done on it will be disclosed. Because all these things are being destroyed in this way, what sort of people must you be in holy behavior and godliness, while waiting for the hastening of the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed, by being burned up, and the celestial bodies will melt as they are consumed by heat. But according to his promise, we are waiting for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness resides. We see here another promise, a promise of coming destruction for the wickedness and violence of man. But we see a promise of a new earth and a new heavens, of a place filled with righteousness and goodness as God intends. And we know this, and Peter is encouraging them, saying, hey, don't think God won't fulfill his promise. He is being patient because he wants everybody to be saved. God does not wish to destroy people. He does not wish for destruction. He wishes for life. So again, the question is, when does God get angry? And what does his anger cause him to do, if not destruction? And to answer these questions, we're going to look at 3 stories in the book of Exodus where God gets angry. The first one is in Exodus chapter 4, if you'll join me there. And we will read that in just a moment. Exodus chapter 4. And this is described as, this is the first place in the entire story of the Bible that we see God is described as angry. And this being the first time makes the story very significant. Anytime there's a first of anything in the Bible, it's very significant. Just like God declaring his character, like he's declaring in Exodus 34, the significance of the first time he describes himself. This is the first time he's described as angry. So let's see here this story. It's in Exodus chapter 4, verses 10 through 17. So read with me here. Exodus chapter 4, verses 10 through 17. And Moses said to Yahweh, "Please, Lord, I am not a man of words, neither recently nor in past, nor since you are speaking to your servant, because I am heavy of mouth and tongue." And Yahweh said to him, "Who gave a mouth to humankind? Or who makes mute, or deaf, or sighted, or blind? Is it not I, Yahweh? So then, go, and I myself will be with your mouth, and I will teach you what you must speak." And he said, "Please, Lord, do not send anyone. Please do send anyone else whom you wish to send." And Yahweh was angry with Moses and said, "Is there not Aaron your brother the Levite? I know certainly that he can speak, and also he is coming up to meet you. And when he sees you, he will rejoice in his heart. And you will speak to him, and you will put words in his mouth, and I myself will be with your mouth and with his mouth. And I will teach you what you must to do, and he will speak for you to the people, and then he will be to you as a mouth, and you will be to him as God. And you must take the staff in your hand with which you will do signs." So we see here that Moses gets angry with Moses. This is the first person he's described as being angry with. This is very interesting. Moses, the one who he is calling to rescue his people. And he's angry at Moses because he's refusing the calling that God has given him. And this is an important calling. This is a calling to rescue the people of God who are being oppressed and enslaved and abused in Egypt. And this is important to God, that his people are taken care of, that this does not take place. And notice how God is very slow to anger. This is, if you read the whole story, the fifth time that Moses is rejecting the calling of God. The fifth time that he puts an excuse, "Don't send me, send anyone else." And so God gets angry with him. But in God's anger, what he does is very interesting. And what he does is he provides Aaron. He says, "Okay, you can't speak. All right, Aaron will speak for you." So God provides a way for Moses to answer his calling, even in his anger. His anger did not produce anything bad or negative, no harsh judgment. It provides a help, and something that Moses will need as you read the rest of the story, Aaron, his own brother, who will then become the high priest. So this is interesting. Okay, so we're starting to see God's anger developed. So let's look at the second time that we see God's anger in the story of the Bible. And this is in Exodus chapter 15. So join me there, if you would. Exodus chapter 15. And here we will see God getting angry the second time. And this is in the song that Miriam writes and the rest of Israel sings after God saves them from Pharaoh through the Red Sea. And we're going to read verses 1 to 13. A little bit lengthy, but I want us to get a good picture of this. "And then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to Yahweh, and they said, 'Let me sing to Yahweh, because he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he hurled into the sea. Yah is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, the God of my father, and I will exalt him. Yahweh is a man of war. Yahweh is his name. The chariots of Pharaoh and his army he cast into the sea, and his choice adjuncts were sunk in the Red Sea. The deep waters covered them. They went down in the depths like a stone. Yahweh, your right hand is glorious in power. Yahweh, your right hand destroyed the enemy. And in the greatness of your majesty, you overthrew those standing up to you. You released your fierce anger, and it consumed them like stubble. And by the breath of your nostrils, waters were piled up. Waves stood like a heap of deep waters in the middle of the sea congealed. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide and plunder. My desire will will be full of them, and I will draw my sword, my hand will destroy them. You blew with your breath, the sea covered them, and they dropped like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you among the gods, Yahweh? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, awesome in praiseworthy actions, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, and the earth swallowed them. In your loyal love, you led the people whom you redeemed. In your strength, you guided them, the abode of your holiness. So here we see God's anger again. And who is he angry at? He's angry at Pharaoh. And what does this anger cause him to do? It causes him to wipe him out and his entire army who's pursuing Israel. But the question is, why is God angry at Pharaoh? Why does he wipe him out? And we can see that through the larger story of Exodus. As we look at why God is angry at Pharaoh, Pharaoh has enslaved and oppressed these people for hundreds of years. This is, in fact, the second Pharaoh over the Israelites who has enslaved them and oppressed them and has cruelly treated them. And God calls Pharaoh to release his people, to stop this cruel action towards his people, and Pharaoh refuses. So then God sends 10 plagues, 10 opportunities for Pharaoh to choose to let his people go. And Pharaoh refuses every time, until the death of the firstborn of Israel. And then with the death of the firstborn of Israel, he says, okay, your people, not of Israel, of Egypt. And with this, he lets Israel go. And then he changes his mind one last time. And this is the last time for him to change his mind. He decides to try to overtake Israel and destroy them as they are leaving the land. And God protects his people by taking Pharaoh out and saying, these are my people, they are under my protection. So God is angry at Pharaoh because he's cruel, because he is unjust, and he has oppressed the people of God. And God gets angry throughout the rest of the Bible every time that there is someone who is oppressing and cruel and who is violent and who does not treat people the way they ought to be treated. And we see them overtaken and destroyed every time. So we see God's anger carries out justice. We see it is still patient. It gave Pharaoh 10 opportunities. But we also see that it protects the oppressed and vulnerable and God's own people. So let's look at the third time to get another view of God's anger. And this is the last time that God gets angry in the book of Exodus. And it's in our story here in Exodus chapter 31. And it goes all the way through 34. And if you remember the story here, God is angry at the betrayal of his own people. And in the process of them being joined with him in a sacred covenant, a covenant that is supposed to resemble marriage. It is to be for life. It is a life commitment to be the people of God and to follow him and love him only. And so we'll see in Exodus 32:10 the statement of God's anger. We can read that real quick. Exodus chapter 32, verse 10, and it says this: Now leave me alone so that my anger may blaze against them, and let me destroy them, and I will make you into a great nation. Now he's talking to Moses about what he is planning to do to the Israelites as they have just committed the sin with the golden calf. And Moses will go on to plead for the people, to plead for forgiveness. And God will forgive them. But it's very interesting here. God gets angry at betrayal of his covenant people. And in fact, this will be the thing that God gets angry at the most throughout the story of the Bible. And we'll see that in Deuteronomy in just a second. But notice what God's anger causes him to do here. It's going to cause him to destroy people. And yet, there's a righteous intercessor, and God turns from his anger. And so even in God's anger, he will relent. God is forgiving, and he is patient. It took him a long time to get angry at the Israelites. This is not just a one-time thing. The golden calf is just the culmination of many things Israel has done up to this point in rebellion against God. They do not trust him. And so God gets angry at his people, his covenant people. So, moving on to Deuteronomy. Again, the time that God gets the most angry is with his covenant people when they betray him. So, there's a warning in Deuteronomy given by Moses. Moses is in Deuteronomy recounting the previous generation of the Israelites. He's recounting the wanderings through the desert, and he is now talking to the new generation about to enter into the promised land. Sorry. And he's about to enter, talking to the new generation, about to enter the promised land. He is now re-giving the law, and he starts to use this language, blessing and curse language. He says, you have a choice, Israel. You can choose life and blessing, or you can choose death and curse. And he urges them to choose life and blessing. And so this warning is very strong throughout Deuteronomy. It's a very good book. I would recommend reading it and studying it. And so as Moses is doing this, he gives a good section. I think we need to take heed of this warning ourselves. And I want to read a couple of sections to get a good feel for this, a good idea. So let's start in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 1 is where we'll start, and we'll go through verse 19. And it says this, now this is a commandment of the rules and the regulations that Yahweh your God charged to teach you, for you to observe in the land you are about to cross over into to take possession of it, so that you may revere Yahweh your God by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, and that I am commanding you and your children and grandchildren all the days of your life, so that you may live long lives. So stopping here for just a moment, we can start to see the parallel, correlation to us, right? We are promised a good place. God has promised us a good place to live. He has given us commandments. He's given us his statutes. He's given us a way to live, and it is so we can live long and good lives and live in this land of promise. Israel is in the same place that we are. And he goes on to say this, and you shall hear, Israel, and be careful to observe these instructions, so that it may go well for you, and that you may multiply greatly, just as Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, promised you in the land with milk and honey. Hear, Israel, Yahweh your God, Yahweh is unique, and you shall love Yahweh your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall recite them to your children, and you shall talk about them at the time of your living in your house, and at the time of your going on the road, and at the time of your laying down, and at the time of your rising up. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as an emblem between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorframe of your houses and on your gates. This is very similar to the commands we're given in the New Testament. To love the Lord our God with everything that we are, with our whole being, to love others. And we're to teach these to our children. We're to know them, to have them in our hearts. Again, this is very applicable for us. It relates and correlates well. And as we continue, it says this, and then it will happen that when Yahweh your God will bring you to the land that he swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you large and fine cities that you did not build, and houses full of all sorts of good things that you did not build, and hewn cisterns that you did not hew, vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant, and you have eaten your fill. Then take care for yourself that you do not forget Yahweh, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and from the house of slavery. You shall fear Yahweh your God, and you shall serve him, and by his name you shall swear. You shall not go after other gods from the gods of the people who are all around you. For Yahweh your God is a jealous God in your midst, so that the anger of Yahweh your God would be kindled, and he would destroy you from the face of the earth. You shall not put Yahweh your God to the test as you tested him and Massah. You shall diligently keep the commandments of Yahweh your God, and his legal provisions, and his rules that he has commanded you. And you shall do what is right and good in the eyes of Yahweh, so that it shall go well for you, and so that you may go and may take possession of the good land that Yahweh swore to your ancestors, by driving out all your enemies before you, just as Yahweh has promised. God has given us a good promise too, hasn't he? And we should not provoke God to anger. We should not betray him as his covenant people. We have been given commandments to love him. And loving him is tied to obedience to him. And we see this even in the teachings of Jesus. We'll see this in the New Testament in John chapter 14, verses 21 through 40. If you'll turn there and read that with me. John chapter 14, verses 21 through 24. The one who has my commandments and keeps them, that one is the one who loves me. And the one who loves me will be loved by my Father. And I will love him and will reveal myself to him. Judas, not Iscariot, said to him, Lord, why is it that you are going to reveal yourself to us and not to the world? And Jesus answered and said to him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and he will come to him and will take up residence with him. The one who does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. Jesus points out that knowing his words, following his words, Jesus has given us commandments. There's things that we should do to love Jesus, and part of that is loving others, right? All the commandments can be summed up in these two, is what Jesus will say, to love God and to love others. So we need to take heed of the word. We've been given a great promise, but we should not provoke God to anger. There is life, grace, forgiveness, compassion, and blessings. But we can choose to reject these and instead choose death, destruction, judgment, and curse. We have an amazing God, and we should choose life. Moses predicts that they will turn from God, though, and as we do as well. And God knows this, so he sets up a system, right? We have Jesus, and in Deuteronomy they had a system as well. We can read this in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 5. And so just to point that out, I'd love to read that. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 5. And so this is after Moses has given a great prophecy of their turning away from God and the curses and death that will come as a result. But he says this, and then when all of these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse that I have set before you, and you call them to mind, among the nations where Yahweh your God has scattered you, and you return to Yahweh, and you listen to his voice according to all that I am commanding you today, both you and your children, with all your heart, with all yourself, and Yahweh your God will restore your fortunes, and he will have compassion upon you, and he will again gather you together from all the peoples, where Yahweh your God scattered you there. Even if you are outcast at the ends of the heavens, and even from Yahweh your God shall gather you from there, and he shall bring you back. God is forgiving. Even when we break covenant with him, even when we provoke him to anger and turn from his commandments and choose death and curse instead of life, he will accept us back if we turn to him. If we remember his words, God is not unreasonable. God is not some rageful being who just destroys everything that is not in agreement with him. He does not want to be angry. He wants to be at peace with us. And he will forgive. And for a moment, I want to talk about the anger of man. Often we compare our anger to God's anger, and this is not correct. We are told very clearly throughout the Bible that the anger of man is very different than God's anger. And so we must be careful in our anger. In Ephesians 4:26, it says, be angry and do not sin. There is anger that is sin, and there is anger that is not. And in James 1:19, it will say, the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. A person who is truly good will get angry sometimes, but it should not be with the anger of man, but with the slow anger of our God. It should not be with unreasonable anger, but with reasonable anger, and forgiveness is possible. It should not be in rageful outbursts. This is not the anger of our God. It should push us to be in a mindset of justice. God is a very just God. And we saw that injustice pushes him to anger, just like with Pharaoh. Injustice should aggravate our souls. It should make us uncomfortable and should cause us to have good actions and to want to change the injustice. But we need to do this in a godly way. So, as we can see, God's anger and human anger is very different. Our God is patient, and he will forgive. But we should not push him to his anger. It is a dangerous road, and we know this from Deuteronomy. Instead, we should love him. We should be obedient to him, and we should choose life and choose blessing. God has given us a choice. He wishes to be at peace with us. He will forgive sins, but he will not allow someone to live a life of sin. This is not what he wishes. So today, if you are in need of prayer or baptism, please reach out to someone here or come forward as we stand.